The crisp autumn air of October 5, 1975, usually brought a sense of peaceful Sunday tradition to Little Rock, Arkansas. Church bells chimed, families gathered, and a feeling of community permeated the streets. But on this particular afternoon, that tranquility was shattered in an instant, forever scarring the memory of a city. Just moments after delivering a powerful sermon, having just greeted his flock with warmth and wisdom, Pastor Michael Greer stepped out of the venerable doors of his church. The sacred ground, still echoing with hymns and prayers, became the backdrop for an unthinkable act of violence. In broad daylight, amid the departing congregants, Pastor Greer was shot. The sudden, brutal gunshot ripped through the calm, replacing quiet goodbyes with screams of terror and disbelief. How could such a thing happen here, at this very place, to this very man? Pastor Michael Greer was more than just a spiritual leader, he was the very heart of his community. His name was synonymous with compassion, his sermons were renowned for their powerful delivery and profound insights, and his leadership extended far beyond the church walls. He was a pillar of Little Rock, a man who tirelessly worked to uplift those around him, offering guidance, hope, and unwavering support. His infectious smile and kind eyes were a source of comfort to countless individuals. At home, he was a devoted husband and a loving father, his family life mirroring the harmonious principles he preached from the pulpit. His reputation was impeccable, a man universally respected and admired, making the atrocity that unfolded even more incomprehensible. That Sunday morning had begun like any other. The sun streamed through the stained glass windows, illuminating faces turned upwards in worship. Pastor Greer had preached a sermon on forgiveness, his voice resonating with conviction and passion. The service concluded, and parishioners lingered, exchanging pleasantries, their hearts full from spiritual nourishment. Children laughed as they ran ahead, and adults chatted amiably, spilling out onto the church steps. Pastor Greer, ever the shepherd, stayed to shake hands and offer blessings, his customary warm farewells. He was just reaching for the car door, perhaps anticipating a quiet family lunch, when the world around him exploded into chaos. The final image many would hold of him was that of his gentle, reassuring presence, moments before unthinkable horror descended. The aftermath was a scene of utter pandemonium. Women shrieked, men shouted, and the air filled with the frantic cries of children. Bodies scattered, some ducking for cover, others rushing forward in a desperate, futile attempt to help. Within minutes, the shocking truth emerged. Pastor Greer lay lifeless on the ground, his lifeblood staining the hallowed pavement. A grim silence soon descended, broken only by raw, guttural sobs. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, closer, signaling the arrival of law enforcement. The Little Rock Police Department descended upon the scene, their faces hardening with professional resolve amidst the palpable grief. Initial confusion reigned. No one seemed to have seen much, not clearly. The attacker had vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind a profound sense of violation. The news ripped through Little Rock like a wildfire, leaving a trail of profound shock, grief, and disbelief. How could their beloved Pastor Greer, a man of God, be targeted in such a brutal fashion? The sense of security, often taken for granted in their close-knit community, was utterly shattered. Vigils were held, tears flowed freely, and questions hung heavy in the air, unanswered and agonizing. People huddled together, trying to make sense of the senseless, struggling to reconcile the peaceful image of their pastor with the violent reality of his death. The city mourned as one, united in their sorrow and yearning for justice. The initial police investigation was swift and thorough, fueled by the community's outrage and the high profile of the victim. Detectives secured the crime scene, meticulously collecting any potential evidence. Witnesses, still in shock, were interviewed, their trembling voices struggling to recall details through a haze of fear. Every corner was searched, every angle considered. However, the leads were scarce, frustratingly so. The sheer brutality of the act, coupled with the apparent lack of motive, made the case an immediate uphill battle. The murder of Pastor Michael Greer quickly morphed into a chilling mystery. Who would want to harm such a man? What possible reason could there be? No robbery was attempted, no obvious personal vendetta surfaced. Law enforcement and the heartbroken community were left with more questions than answers, plunged into a dark abyss of uncertainty. Stay with us as we unravel this decades-old mystery, tracing the threads of a cold case that gripped a city. Don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories that seek to uncover long-buried truths. The initial fervor of the investigation, though intense and comprehensive, yielded agonizingly few breakthroughs in the weeks and months following Pastor Greer's murder. Detectives worked tirelessly, chasing down every tip, re-interviewing every witness, painstakingly reconstructing the moments leading up to the tragedy. Yet, each avenue explored seemed to lead to a dead end. The sheer shock of the events slowly began to morph into a gnawing frustration for law enforcement and the community alike. The expected rapid resolution vanished, replaced by the grim reality of a complex and baffling case. Critical evidence, like a clear fingerprint or a definitive eyewitness account, seemed to elude them. Some initial witness statements, though made in good faith, were vague or contradictory, hampered by the chaos and terror of the moment. Others, perhaps intimidated or simply wanting to distance themselves from the horrific event, proved uncooperative, offering little more than platitudes and prayers. The trail, once seemingly fresh and promising, began to grow cold, like a wilting flower in the harsh light of an unsolved crime. Each passing day without an arrest chipped away at the hope for a swift resolution, leaving only a lingering sense of despair. Public outcry swelled, a collective roar demanding justice for their fallen spiritual leader. Citizens' meetings packed community halls, where grief-stricken parishioners and concerned residents voiced their anger and sorrow. Vigils became a regular occurrence, candles flickering in the evening breeze, each flame a silent plea for answers. Petitions circulated, urging increased police efforts, questioning whether enough was truly being done. The pressure on the Little Rock Police Department was immense, a constant reminder of the community's pain and their desperate need for closure. The weight of expectation was heavy, yet without concrete leads, the investigators found themselves hitting wall after wall. For Pastor Greer's family, the ordeal was unimaginable. His widow, her life irrevocably altered, struggled to comfort their children while grappling with her own profound sorrow and confusion. The absence at the dinner table, the empty chair in the living room, the silences where his laughter once filled the air, each was a cruel reminder of their loss, compounded by the horrific, unexplained nature of his death. Their grief was a heavy cloak, made heavier by the gnawing uncertainty, the lack of answers that could offer even a semblance of understanding. They yearned for justice, not just for Pastor Greer, but for their own shattered peace. Within the grieving community, theories and rumors began to circulate like wildfire, attempting to fill the void left by the official silence. Was it a random act of violence, a senseless tragedy that could have befallen anyone? Was it a personal vendetta, a dark secret from the pastor's past, however unlikely that seemed for such an upstanding man? Or perhaps a robbery gone wrong, even though nothing appeared to be taken? These whispers and conjectures, fueled by fear and speculation, only added to the confusion, creating a tapestry of conflicting narratives that further obscured the truth. Everyone had an opinion, a suspicion, yet no one had the definitive answer. As weeks turned into months, and months into years, the initial fervor of the investigation gradually subsided. The headlines faded, the vigils grew smaller, and the active search for the killer slowed. The Pastor Michael Greer murder case, once an urgent priority, subtly transitioned from an active investigation to the dreaded, cold case status. The files were meticulously boxed and stored, gathering dust in police archives, a silent testament to an unresolved tragedy. The passage of time, while dulling the immediate pain for some, only solidified the injustice for others, cementing the case into the painful annals of Little Rock's history. The unsolved murder continued to cast a long, dark shadow over Little Rock. It became a constant, unspoken reminder of a brutal, unpunished act that had violated sacred ground and shattered a community's innocence. Every mention of that fateful Sunday in 1975 brought with it a fresh wave of sorrow and frustration. The city moved on, life continued, but the ghost of Pastor Greer's unsolved murder lingered, a stark symbol of justice denied. It served as a somber warning, a wound that never truly healed, always present beneath the surface of daily life. Yet, despite the lack of progress and the decades that passed, a small, determined group refused to let the case be forgotten entirely. For Pastor Greer's family, particularly his eldest daughter, it was a deeply personal mission. Their hope, though repeatedly tested, never completely extinguished. A handful of dedicated individuals, perhaps a retired detective or a persistent family friend, would periodically resurface, reigniting interest, holding on to the faint hope that one day, the truth would finally emerge, bringing peace to a long-suffering family and a community still yearning for answers. Their hope, though repeatedly tested, never completely extinguished. A handful of dedicated individuals, perhaps a retired detective or a persistent family friend, would periodically resurface, reigniting interest, holding on to the faint hope that one day, the truth would finally emerge, bringing peace to a long-suffering family and a community still yearning for answers. Decades later, the landscape of criminal investigation had evolved dramatically. The digital age brought with it sophisticated forensic techniques unimaginable in 1975, alongside a renewed commitment from law enforcement to tackle long-standing mysteries. Across the nation, cold case units, once a rarity, began to emerge or gain prominence, staffed by veteran detectives whose passion lay in rectifying historical injustices. In Arkansas, a concentrated effort to re-evaluate dormant files led to the creation of a specialized cold case unit, a small but dedicated team tasked with sifting through forgotten tragedies. This unit's inception proved to be the pivotal turning point for the case of Pastor Michael Greer. Its very existence meant that his murder, once relegated to dusty archives, would finally receive a fresh, unbiased look through the lens of modern science and investigative psychology. The catalyst for revisiting Pastor Greer's case wasn't a dramatic new tip or a sudden confession, but rather a systematic review process. The cold case unit categorized unsolved homicides by potential for resolution, and Pastor Greer's file, despite its age and lack of initial leads, held several intriguing, albeit subtle, anomalies. New forensic technology, particularly advancements in DNA analysis and digital cross-referencing of records, hinted at possibilities that simply didn't exist in the 1970s. A younger detective, known for his relentless pursuit of detail and his unconventional thinking, stumbled upon the thick, yellowed file during an intake assessment. Something about the meticulous notes of the original investigators, coupled with the glaring void of actual suspects, piqued his interest. He saw not a closed book, but a puzzle missing crucial pieces that modern tools might finally provide. That lead detective, Sarah Jenkins, was exactly what the case needed. In her late 30s, with piercing blue eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for quiet tenacity, Jenkins approached each cold case as if the crime had happened yesterday. She possessed an innate ability to connect seemingly disparate facts, fueled by an unwavering belief that every victim deserved justice, no matter how much time had passed. Her process was painstaking. She ordered every single document from the Greer file to be digitized, creating a searchable database. She meticulously reviewed police reports, witness statements, crime scene photos, and even weather reports from that fateful day in 1975. She sought out the surviving original investigators, gleaning insights into their frustrations and the limitations they faced, building a comprehensive understanding from the ground up, refusing to let any detail escape her scrutiny. The re-examination of original evidence was a revelation. While the initial investigation was thorough for its time, Jenkins quickly identified areas where modern techniques could extract new information. A microscopic fiber found clinging to Pastor Greer's suit jacket, dismissed in 1975 as irrelevant due to lack of comparative databases, was now sent for advanced analysis. Crime scene photos, once blurry and limited, were digitally enhanced, revealing faint, almost imperceptible details that had been overlooked. A particular witness statement, initially deemed unreliable due to the witness's emotional state, was re-evaluated by a behavioral psychologist, who identified subtle cues that pointed to an underlying, partially suppressed memory. These tiny elements, individually insignificant, began to weave together, forming a new, compelling tapestry. The missing piece, That singular, crucial detail finally emerged from the reinterpretation of a forgotten snippet within a local newspaper archive. An article from a small-town paper, published months after the murder and largely ignored by the Little Rock detectives, mentioned a man with a distinct, unusual scar who had left his job abruptly around the time of the shooting, relocating hours away without explanation. The article stated this man had a minor, unrelated dispute with Pastor Greer several weeks prior, seemingly over a trivial community matter. In 1975, the connection was too tenuous, the man's sudden departure not suspicious enough to warrant a full-scale inter-county investigation. But Jenkins's team cross-referenced this detail with the enhanced crime scene photos, focusing on a faint, almost invisible shoe print, and the unique fiber from Pastor Greer's jacket. Suddenly, the reevaluation of evidence, and this decades-old newspaper snippet coalesced, pointing towards a specific individual previously considered and dismissed almost immediately due to his perceived irrelevance and his rapid disappearance from the Little Rock area. The suspect was a former church handyman, a quiet, almost invisible figure named Art Simmons, who had been dismissed from his position a month before the murder after a minor altercation with Pastor Greer over church funds. The original detectives had interviewed him briefly, noted his alibi, and moved on, considering him too insignificant. Art Simmons had vanished shortly thereafter, his departure attributed to personal reasons, and his connection to the church seen as purely transactional. Building the new case was a painstaking process, a meticulous reconstruction across 50 years. Detective Jenkins and her team didn't just retrace steps, they rebuilt the entire narrative. They connected the unique sole pattern from the enhanced print to a specific, limited edition workboot model, then cross-referenced sales records from nearby stores, identifying a purchase by Art Simmons weeks before the murder. The fiber from Pastor Greer's jacket matched fibers from Simmons's previous handyman uniform, which had been found discarded in a remote landfill years later during an environmental cleanup. Every disparate fact, every overlooked detail, was now meticulously linked, forming a powerful, undeniable chain of evidence. With the new evidence firmly in place, the cold case unit initiated a quiet surveillance operation. Arthur Simmons, now in his late 70s, was living a seemingly unremarkable life in a small town several states away. He had remarried, retired from a low-level manufacturing job, and was known as a reclusive, but otherwise harmless, old man. Discreet monitoring revealed little out of the ordinary, but the team wasn't looking for new crimes, they were building a contemporary profile to support their historical evidence. They gathered phone records, bank statements, and observed his daily routines, all while slowly, carefully, tightening the net around a man who had successfully evaded justice for nearly 5 decades. The unmasking of Art Simmons sent a seismic shockwave through the Little Rock community, a new tremor decades after the initial earthquake of Pastor Greer's murder. The name itself, once vaguely familiar to some older parishioners but long forgotten by most, now echoed with a chilling resonance. Art Simmons, the quiet, almost invisible church handyman who had slipped away unnoticed in the wake of the tragedy, was revealed to be the key figure in this decades-old mystery. His identity was not that of a notorious criminal, a known villain, or a random assailant. Rather, he was a man who had blended seamlessly back into society, his past a well-guarded secret. The unexpected nature of the individual, not an outsider, but someone once connected, however peripherally, to the victim and the church, made the revelation even more profoundly unsettling, forcing everyone to confront the deceptive nature of appearances. His quiet demeanor had masked a dark secret for 50 years. Following his abrupt departure from Little Rock in 1975, Arthur Simmons had meticulously constructed a new life. He settled in a small, unassuming town in Missouri, hundreds of miles away from the scene of his crime. There, he took on a series of blue-collar jobs, working diligently and without drawing attention to himself. He met and married a local woman, a quiet widow with no children of her own, who knew nothing of his shadowed past. They lived in a modest house, cultivated a small vegetable garden, and attended a different, much smaller church. He was known in his new community simply as Art, a reserved but Dependable man, a good neighbor who kept to himself. His existence was the very picture of normalcy, a successful camouflage designed to bury the heinous act he had committed in his youth. The irony was palpable. The man who murdered a beloved pastor had, for all intents and purposes, become an unremarkable, seemingly decent citizen. The true motive behind the shooting, when finally revealed by Detective Jenkins's painstaking work, was far more complex and tragically petty than any of the initial theories had suggested. It wasn't a grand conspiracy, a rival church dispute, or a robbery gone wrong. It stemmed from a profound humiliation and simmering resentment. Arthur Simmons, as the church handyman, had been caught embezzling a small sum from the church's petty cash fund, barely $200, a significant amount for him at the time, but trifling in the grand scheme of things. Pastor Greer, in his compassionate wisdom, had chosen not to press criminal charges, opting instead for a quiet dismissal and a stern admonition, hoping to guide Simmons back to a righteous path. But for Simmons, this act of mercy was perceived as an unbearable public shaming, an affront to his fragile pride. He felt exposed, judged, and fundamentally disrespected by the man he believed had ruined his standing, however minor, in the community. The motive was not greed, but a distorted sense of wounded ego and a terrifying desire for vengeance against the one who had, in his warped view, cast him out. The arrest itself was swift and meticulously planned. A team of officers, led by Detective Jenkins, approached Arthur Simmons's unassuming Missouri home early one crisp morning. Simmons, clad in a faded bathrobe, answered the door, his eyes widening in a mixture of confusion and dawning horror as he recognized the badges. There was no struggle, no dramatic chase. Only a profound, almost weary resignation. As the handcuffs clicked into place, the years seemed to fall away from his face, revealing not the benign old man, but a haunted figure finally confronting the demon he had carried for half a century. The contrast between the long-ago act of sudden, shocking violence and this quiet, almost anticlimactic apprehension underscored the chilling patience of justice, slowly but relentlessly closing in. In Little Rock, the renewed shock and disbelief were almost as intense as in 1975, but for vastly different reasons. The community had long assumed the killer was a phantom, an unknown evil. To learn the perpetrator was Arthur Simmons, a man who had once walked the same church halls, who had been an acquaintance, however distant, evoked a new wave of collective trauma. People struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet handyman with that of a cold-blooded murderer. Conversations buzzed with disbelief. Art Simmons? I remember him. He fixed my leaky faucet once. The ripple effect was profound, causing individuals to re-examine their own memories, their interactions, and the subtle, often unseen darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of everyday life. It was a stark reminder that evil could wear a familiar face. The arrest forced a confronting re-evaluation of memory. For decades, the narrative surrounding Pastor Greer's murder had been one of senseless, random violence. Now, with Simmons's name in the headlines, older residents delved into their recollections, digging up forgotten glances, fleeting conversations, or minor incidents involving the handyman that, in hindsight, took on a sinister new meaning. Some remembered Simmons as sullen, others as prone to quiet brooding. These re-examined memories, once innocuous, now became pieces of a terrifying puzzle, retroactively fitting into the emerging picture of a man driven by a quiet, murderous rage. The community grappled with the unsettling realization that the monster had been among them, overlooked for decades. With Arthur Simmons's arrest, the wheels of justice, dormant for nearly 5 decades, finally began to turn. He was extradited back to Arkansas, and the initial legal proceedings commenced. The arraignment was a somber affair, packed with media and members of the Greer family, their faces a mixture of relief and renewed pain. Simmons pleaded not guilty, a predictable but emotionally jarring declaration for those who had waited so long for this moment. Charges were formally filed, detailing the premeditated nature of the crime, supported by the wealth of new evidence painstakingly collected by Detective Jenkins and her team. A bail hearing was held, but given the severity of the charges and the flight risk demonstrated by his original disappearance, Simmons was denied bail, marking the beginning of his incarceration and the long-awaited formal path toward trial. For Pastor Greer's family, the arrest brought a deluge of complex emotions. There was an undeniable sense of relief, a fragile hope that the monstrous unknown had finally been given a face, and that justice was within reach. But with that relief came a renewed wave of profound grief. The cold, analytical details of the motive, the reminder of their beloved Michael's last moments, reopened wounds that had never truly healed. His widow, her face etched with years of sorrow, expressed a quiet dignity. The children, now adults themselves, spoke of a bittersweet moment, the beginning of a new, perhaps final, chapter in their relentless quest to honor their father's memory and finally find some measure of peace. The journey was far from over, but the darkest shadow had begun to lift. The public unraveling of the case began almost immediately after Arthur Simmons's arrest, transforming what had been a decades-old local tragedy into a national headline. As the pre-trial phase commenced, details meticulously unearthed by Detective Jenkins's team started to surface through court documents and carefully worded police statements, painting a stark, horrifying picture of the events of October 1975. The narrative of a beloved pastor, murdered by a seemingly random assailant, was replaced by the far more insidious reality of a calculated act of vengeance carried out by someone within the church's own orbit. The media, both local and national, descended upon Little Rock, eager to report on the shocking culmination of nearly 50 years of investigation. Every piece of new information, every revelation about Simmons's past and his connection to Pastor Greer, was dissected and analyzed, becoming fodder for news cycles and true crime podcasts. The community, still reeling from the initial shock of the arrest, now faced the uncomfortable truth of the motive and the identity of the perpetrator. These disclosures sent fresh shockwaves through the community of Little Rock. People who had known both Pastor Greer and Art Simmons, even casually, grappled with the cognitive dissonance. How could the quiet handyman, the man who'd fixed the church's leaky roof and trimmed the bushes, be the cold-blooded murderer they had sought for so long? Old acquaintances racked their brains, searching for any signs they might have missed, any flicker of malice beneath Simmons's reserved exterior. Coffee shops and local diners became impromptu forums for discussion, where hushed voices debated the revelations, trying to reconcile the image of the man they thought they knew with the monster he was now accused of being. The sheer ordinariness of Simmons's life, especially his seemingly unremarkable existence for 5 decades following the crime, made the treachery all the more difficult to comprehend. It shattered illusions about who could commit such an act and forced a re-evaluation of trust within familiar circles. Arthur Simmons, through his court-appointed attorney, launched his initial legal strategy, a steadfast denial of all charges. His defense team argued mistaken identity, claiming the decades-old evidence was circumstantial and tainted by the passage of time. They asserted that while Simmons had indeed worked at the church and had left Little Rock shortly after the murder, these facts did not constitute proof of guilt. They hinted at procedural errors in the original investigation and questioned the reliability of newly reinterpreted evidence, laying the groundwork for a challenging legal battle. It was a predictable but robust defense, aiming to create enough reasonable doubt in the minds of future jurors to prevent a conviction, despite the compelling narrative the prosecution was beginning to build. The prosecution, however, was prepared. They intended to present a formidable array of evidence, a carefully constructed mosaic of both rediscovered old clues and cutting-edge forensic findings. Key pieces included the digitally enhanced crime scene photos showing the unique shoe print, now conclusively matched to the specific model of work boots purchased by Simmons. The microscopic fiber recovered from Pastor Greer's jacket, identified as being consistent with materials used in Simmons's old handyman uniform, would be a critical physical link. Additionally, they had uncovered financial records contradicting Simmons's original alibi, showing he had not been where he claimed to be at the time of the murder. New cellular tower data, though from a much later period, helped establish behavioral patterns and movements that subtly supported the prosecution's theory of his flight. Perhaps most compellingly, the prosecution was banking on witness testimonies. Several individuals who had originally given vague statements, or had been reluctant to fully cooperate in 1975, were now willing to speak, their consciences stirred by the long-awaited arrest. One elderly woman, who had been a young choir member at the time, now clearly recalled seeing Simmons near the church entrance around the time of the shooting, a detail she had suppressed due to fear. Another witness, a retired shopkeeper, reluctantly admitted he had seen Simmons acting agitated and nervous in the days leading up to the murder, a detail he had dismissed as insignificant at the time. The passage of time had undoubtedly affected memories, but for some, the weight of the unsolved crime had made their suppressed recollections clearer, or at least more urgent to share. The weight of the past was palpable, transforming the upcoming trial into more than just a legal proceeding. It became a community reckoning. It wasn't merely about convicting one man. It was about confronting a painful, unresolved chapter in Little Rock's history. The trial would force everyone to revisit the trauma of 1975, to examine the fears and suspicions that had festered for decades. It was an opportunity, finally, to bring truth to light, but in doing so, it would inevitably stir up old sorrows and force a collective confrontation with the dark realities of betrayal and violence that had once ripped through their peaceful Sunday. The entire city held its breath, braced for the emotional intensity of the impending court battle. The media frenzy surrounding the case escalated dramatically. Local newspapers published daily updates, detailing every public scrap of information, every court filing. National news outlets dispatched correspondents, drawn by the compelling narrative of a nearly 5-decade-old cold case finally being solved, complete. With a shocking reveal of the unassuming murderer. Television crews set up outside the courthouse, eager to capture reactions from family members, legal teams, and members of the public. The story of Pastor Michael Greer, a man long remembered but whose killer remained elusive, was now gripping audiences across the country, a testament to the enduring human fascination with justice, however long it takes to achieve. For Pastor Greer's family, this period was an agonizing tightrope walk between hope and trepidation. The initial surge of relief and vindication following the arrest had slowly given way to a renewed sense of anxiety. They hoped for justice, for a definitive end to their decades-long ordeal, but the prospect of a contentious trial, of having to relive the horrific details of their loved one's murder in a public forum, filled them with dread. It was a necessary step, they knew, but an immensely difficult one. They attended every pre-trial hearing, their silent presence a powerful testament to their unwavering demand for accountability, their faces a poignant mixture of resilience, grief, and the quiet, desperate longing for true closure. The day the trial began, a palpable tension hung in the air, thick enough to be cut with a knife. The courtroom, a solemn chamber built of dark wood and hushed acoustics, was packed to capacity. Every seat was taken, every aisle stood filled with reporters, community members, and legal observers. But at the heart of the proceedings sat the Greer family, a silent, unified front, their faces etched with a mosaic of anticipation, grief, and an almost unbearable hope for vindication. Across the room, separated by the chasm of time and justice, sat Arthur Simmons, now a frail, hunched figure, his face devoid of emotion, an enigma that had tormented a community for half a century. The gravity of the moment was undeniable. Decades of unresolved pain, unanswered questions, and relentless pursuit now culminated in this singular, decisive confrontation. The prosecution's opening statement was a masterclass in emotional impact and forensic precision. The lead prosecutor, a woman with a voice that commanded attention and eyes that conveyed unwavering conviction, began by painting a vivid picture of Little Rock in 1975, of Pastor Michael Greer's gentle nature, and the sanctity of the church shattered by an act of cold-blooded violence. She then meticulously laid out their case, piece by painstaking piece, detailing the re-examination of evidence, the modern forensic breakthroughs, and the compelling narrative that linked Arthur Simmons directly to the crime. She spoke of betrayal and a petty motive, culminating in a powerful assertion that justice, though delayed, was now ready to be served. The defense, in stark contrast, offered a counter-argument of reasonable doubt. Simmons's attorney, while acknowledging the tragedy, dismissed the prosecution's case as a mosaic of circumstantial evidence and aged, unreliable testimony, arguing that the passage of time had corrupted memories and clouded facts, creating a convenient scapegoat out of his client. Key witness accounts proved to be the bedrock of the prosecution's case. One of the most compelling was that of an elderly woman, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, who had been a young choir member in 1975. Her voice, though trembling with age and emotion, resonated with newfound clarity, as she described seeing Arthur Simmons lurking near the church exit just moments before the gunshot. She confessed to suppressing the memory for decades, terrified of implicating anyone and haunted by the violence, but now felt compelled to speak the truth. Forensic experts then took the stand, coolly and scientifically dismantling the defense's claims. They presented the microscopic fiber evidence, conclusively matching it to Simmons's discarded work uniform. The shoe print analysis, once a forgotten detail, became a damning piece of circumstantial evidence, tying Simmons to the exact location of the shooting. Arthur Simmons himself, under the advice of his counsel, chose not to take the stand. His silence spoke volumes to some, while others saw it as a tactical move to avoid self-incrimination. His demeanor throughout the trial remained largely impassive, a blank slate that offered no insight into his thoughts. This decision, though legally sound, deprived the court of an opportunity to hear directly from the accused, leaving a lingering void for those desperate to understand the why. The cross-examination phases were often moments of intense drama. The defense attorney, adept and aggressive, relentlessly challenged the prosecution's witnesses, questioning Mrs. Vance's memory after 50 years, attempting to poke holes in the forensic timelines, and suggesting alternative interpretations of the evidence. There were tense exchanges, particularly when the defense suggested that the cold case unit might have been overly zealous in their desire to solve such a high-profile case, possibly bending facts to fit their narrative. However, Detective Jenkins, when called to the stand, remained steadfast and composed, defending the integrity of her team's meticulous investigation with calm authority, her commitment to the truth shining through. The emotional core of the trial came from the testimony of Pastor Greer's family. His widow, now frail but dignified, recounted the devastating impact of his loss, her voice catching as she described the void he left in their lives and the community. His children, now adults, spoke movingly of their father's character, his unwavering kindness, and the lifetime of milestones he missed. Their words, raw with grief and love, painted a poignant picture of the man who was taken too soon, reminding everyone in the courtroom that beneath the legal arguments and forensic details lay a profound human tragedy, a life brutally extinguished, and a family forever scarred. The defense's strategy, despite the weight of the new evidence, centered on creating reasonable doubt. They hammered away at the age of the crime, the potential for memory degradation, and the circumstantial nature of much of the evidence. They suggested that while Simmons might have been an unsavory character, there was no irrefutable proof that he was the actual killer. They even floated the theory that the original investigation, hampered by limited technology, might have overlooked other, more plausible suspects, implying that the cold case unit had become fixated on Simmons to achieve a long-awaited resolution. It was a desperate attempt to sow uncertainty, to exploit any lingering ambiguity for their client's freedom. Finally, after weeks of testimony, arguments, and counter-arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. The tension in the courtroom became almost unbearable. Decades of evidence, fragments of memory, and the fate of an old man, all lay in the hands of 12 individuals. The Greer family sat in hushed anticipation, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and anxiety. The long-awaited justice, for which they had yearned for nearly 5 decades, was now hanging precariously in the balance. The silence of the deliberation room was deafening, a stark contrast to the courtroom's earlier fervor, as Little Rock held its collective breath. The hushed courtroom held its breath, a collective intake of air that seemed to last an eternity, as the jury foreman handed the verdict slip to the bailiff. Weeks of grueling testimony, the weight of 50 years of unresolved grief, and the meticulous unraveling of a cold case had culminated in this singular, defining moment. Every eye in the crowded room was fixed on the judge, his expression unreadable as he unfolded the paper. The Greer family, tightly clustered in the front row, clasped hands, their knuckles white. Across the aisle, Arthur Simmons sat motionless, his face a mask of weary anticipation. The judge cleared his throat, and the world seemed to hold still. In the case of the state of Arkansas versus Arthur Simmons, he began, his voice cutting through the silence. On the charge of first-degree murder, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. A wave of profound relief, almost seismic in its impact, rippled through the courtroom. A quiet, collective sob escaped the Greer family, quickly followed by the distinct sound of tears, both joyful and mournful. Mrs. Greer, her face streaked with tears, looked skyward, a silent prayer of thanks on her lips, her husband's memory finally vindicated. Elsewhere, there were gasps of vindication, hushed whispers of "finally," and the almost imperceptible shaking of heads in disbelief from a few who had clung to the notion of Simmons's innocence. For Arthur Simmons, the verdict brought no visible change in expression, only a slight tightening around his eyes, a flicker of something akin to despair perhaps, but quickly masked. He had maintained his poker face throughout the trial, and he would maintain it even in the face of conviction. The long, agonizing wait was over, replaced by a new, more concrete reality. The sentencing phase followed quickly, a stark and formal process that stood in contrast to the emotional climax of the verdict. The judge, in his solemn black robes, spoke of the profound tragedy, the decades of pain inflicted upon the victim's family, and the community's long-held yearning for justice. Victim impact statements, delivered by Pastor Greer's now adult children, were particularly poignant. They spoke not of vengeance, but of the gaping void their father's absence had left, the milestones missed, the wisdom unspoken, and the enduring shadow that had hung over their lives. They urged the judge to deliver a sentence that reflected the gravity of the crime and the 50 years of evasion. Arthur Simmons, despite his advanced age, received the maximum sentence allowable by law for a crime committed in 1975, life imprisonment. The judge made it clear that, given the circumstances, there would be no possibility of parole. Justice, a slow-moving but ultimately inexorable force, had finally caught up. For the Greer family, the verdict and sentencing represented more than just a legal outcome. It was the ultimate step towards an elusive closure. The nearly 5-decade-long ordeal, a constant undercurrent of pain and unanswered questions, had finally found its resolution. It wasn't a sudden erasure of grief, that wound would always remain, but it was a profound lifting of the burden of uncertainty. They could now mourn their beloved Michael, not as a victim of an unknown assailant, but as a man whose killer had been identified, held accountable, and justly punished. The long night of waiting was finally over, and with it came the fragile, hopeful dawn of healing. The community of Little Rock absorbed the final outcome with a collective sigh of relief, tinged with lingering sadness. There was a sense of justice not just for the Greer family, but for the entire city, which had carried the weight of the unsolved murder for so long. Local churches held special services, not only in remembrance of Pastor Michael Greer but also in quiet acknowledgement of the perseverance of justice. It was a moment of reflection, a time to heal collectively, and to finally put to rest a ghost that had haunted their collective memory for half a century. The focus shifted from the who and how to a quiet remembrance of the good man taken too soon. The trial had laid bare the motive, confirming Detective Jenkins's meticulous investigation. Arthur Simmons, consumed by a petty humiliation after Pastor Greer's compassionate but firm dismissal, had harbored a festering resentment that culminated in a moment of cold, calculated violence. It wasn't a grand conspiracy or a deep-seated evil against the church itself, but a twisted, personal vendetta born of wounded pride. The simplicity of the motive, against the backdrop of such profound and lasting devastation, highlighted the unpredictable and often trivial origins of human darkness. The finality of the court's decision put an end to all speculation, leaving no lingering questions about the why. The long road to justice taken in the case of Pastor Michael Greer became an extraordinary testament to the unwavering commitment of law enforcement and the relentless pursuit of truth. It underscored the profound importance of cold case units, demonstrating that no matter how much time passes, justice can still be served if dedicated individuals refuse to let a case fade into oblivion. This was a victory for perseverance, a beacon of hope for other families still awaiting answers, proving that the passage of time, while challenging, does not necessarily defeat the pursuit of accountability. The legacy of this case will undoubtedly endure in Arkansas and beyond. It stands as a powerful narrative in the annals of cold case resolutions, a story of how modern forensic science, combined with old-fashioned detective work and unwavering dedication, can bring closure to historical tragedies. Pastor Michael Greer's murder, once a symbol of an unpunished crime, transformed into a symbol of justice, however delayed. His memory, and the enduring fight for his truth, will forever be etched into the fabric of Little Rock's history, a somber yet ultimately hopeful reminder that some wrongs, no matter how old, can eventually be righted. The resolution of Pastor Michael Greer's murder, from that shocking crime in 1975 to Arthur Simmons's eventual arrest and conviction, etched an indelible mark on the landscape of Little Rock. Justice, though painstakingly delayed for nearly 5 decades, was ultimately served, reaffirming a fundamental belief that such heinous acts would not go unpunished forever. The journey, fraught with despair and frustration, had finally reached its destination, offering a profound sense of closure to a wound that had festered for generations. The community, once haunted by the specter of an unknown killer, could now rest knowing that accountability had been delivered. The enduring impact of this resolution touched countless lives. For the Greer family, it was a profound shift from perpetual anticipation to a hard-won peace. The children, who had grown up in the shadow of their father's unsolved murder, found a measure of healing, finally able to fully grieve and remember him without the gnawing question of who. Detective Sarah Jenkins and her cold case unit, whose tireless dedication brought Simmons to justice, saw their commitment validated, proving that no case was truly hopeless. And for the community of Little Rock itself, the resolution brought a collective sigh of relief, allowing them to finally reconcile with a painful chapter of their history, moving forward with a renewed sense of security and trust in their justice system. This case stands as a powerful testament to the power of perseverance. The unwavering hope of Pastor Greer's family, who never gave up their quest for answers, provided a silent but potent driving force. More critically, the relentless dedication of law enforcement, particularly the cold case unit that resurrected the dormant file, proved pivotal. Their refusal to let the case succumb to the dustbin of history, their meticulous re-examination of old evidence through new technological lenses, and their relentless pursuit of the truth, all coalesced into an extraordinary triumph against the erosion of time. It was a victory not just for justice, but for the human spirit's capacity to endure and fight for what is right. In concluding this heartbreaking yet ultimately triumphant narrative, we must reflect on the life of Pastor Michael Greer. He was a man of God, a pillar of his community, radiating kindness and compassion. His legacy was one of service, love, and unwavering faith. The tragic circumstances of his death cast a long shadow, but the eventual resolution of his murder ensures that his memory can now be truly honored. He can finally rest, and his family can find the peace they so desperately sought. Their long vigil has ended, replaced by the quiet dignity of knowing that his killer was brought to account. The broader implications of this case resonate far beyond Little Rock. It underscores the critical importance of cold case units in modern law enforcement, not just as a means to solve old crimes, but as a commitment to justice for all victims, regardless of when their tragedy occurred. It highlights how advancements in forensic capabilities can breathe new life into seemingly dead ends, transforming forgotten clues into irrefutable evidence. Most importantly, it teaches us never to give up on seeking the truth, for every victim deserves to have their story told and their perpetrator held accountable. This story is a powerful message of hope and the enduring pursuit of justice, even across decades. It reminds us that while the wheels of justice may turn slowly, they grind exceedingly fine. The resilience of the human spirit, especially that of the Greer family, in the face of unimaginable tragedy, serves as an inspiration. It is a testament to the fact that time does not diminish the gravity of a crime, nor does it extinguish the flame of justice. If you found this compelling story of perseverance and delayed justice resonating with you, please like this video, share it with others who appreciate true crime narratives, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that bring long-awaited justice to light. What other cold cases, where the truth was finally uncovered after decades, would you like us to cover and explore? Let us know your thoughts and suggestions in the comments below.